We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Mem Chesam and Beis and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 148b. And the previous summit, the Gemara brought a statement from Reish Lakish. If somebody sells a house to his friend and he says it's al minas, it's on the condition that the diyoto helyona, that the upper story will belong to me, will belong to the seller. So then we say his words are effective and the upper story belongs to the seller. And the Gemara now continues, they had the following question. If a person sells the house to one person and the upper story to another person, what is the halacha? Mi have a shear, is it considered that he leaves that upper story for the other person, low or not? And the Rashbam explains, they had the following question. He sells the house to one person and again the diota to another person. B'matanas bari, this is talking about a gift that's being given by a healthy person. Udiota le'echad have a makam shiur, and the question is over here, when he sells the diota to another person, so are we saying that it's considered that he leaves it for that other person? Meaning to say, mi'ika lahai bal diota, does this person who owns the upper story, does he have shiur makam b'chotzer? Does he also have a place that he has a certain amount of rights in the courtyard? That's the question of the Gemara. When the Gemara says mi have a shiur or lo, is it considered that he has rights in the chotzer, in the courtyard, lo etzoas azizin, in order, let's say he wants to attach something to the wall that's going to project out over the chotzer, or does he not have that right? Again, that's the question of the Gemara. In this case, a bayis le'echad udiota le'echad mahu mi have a shiur or lo. And the Gemara continues, im timsa lomer. Now, if you're going to say bayis le'echad udiota le'echad, let's say you say he sells the house to one person and the upper story to another person, lo have a shiur, that's not considered to be a shiur. And we'll take a look at the Rashbam as the Rashbam continues. Im timsa lomer lo have a shiur la'achrini. If you're going to say that for somebody else, when he's selling the diota, the upper story, he's not keeping it for himself, but he's selling it to someone else, that person does not have those rights. Avoliatz will have a shiur. But the question then is, what about to himself? Is that a shiur? Could go into Amar le bayas ani mocher lo chutz midiotoelyona. For example, let's say he says, I'm selling you the house except for the upper story. In that case, does he have the rights in the chutzer? Odil molek a shiur. Maybe you're going to say, no, he does not have those rights. Again, the Gemara continues, if you're going to say that when he sells the upper story to a different person, we do not say it's a shiur, and he doesn't have rights in the chutzer, chutz midiota mahu, what if it would be where he's selling the house with the exception of the diota? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav says that Rav Nachman says, Im timsa lomer bayis le'echad diota le'echad lo have a shiur. If you're going to say that in that case of bayis le'echad and diota le'echad, it's not considered that he gives rights to the person who owns the diota, but still chutz mi diota have a shiur. But if he says except for the diota, so then he is leaving himself those rights. And the Gemara explains, Va'aliba de Rav Zavid. This is all following Rav Zavid. To Amar, who says Shimrotza lahotzi bazizin, that if he wants to attach something to the wall which is going to project out into the chutzer, motzi, he is allowed to do that. Al makevan de shayir diota makam zizin nami shayir. You see that since he left for himself the rights of the upper story, he leaves for himself as well that area where he's going to put the zizin, which are going to project into the chutzer. And the Rashbam explains, the idea over here is that when a person says, in general, without making any particular stipulations, a person just says, he says, I'm going to sell you this house, the halacha happens to be, the halacha happens to be that the person who's acquiring the house doesn't automatically get the upper story. That's a Mishnah. Earlier in Hamocher Sabayis, lo mocher sagag, bisman sheyesh lo makeh, gavoa yud tfachim, that he's not selling him the roof if it has a fence of 10 tfachim. Dahainu diota, and that's the equivalent of a diota, that's an upper story. So therefore, when he says chutz, when he says with the exception of the diota, which he didn't need to say, because that was an exception anyhow, so litfuye mil sakasi, those extra words are coming to add some kind of rights. V'shayir lo makam b'chutzer, and therefore he also has rights within the chutzer, lo hotzoas, zizin mina diota, that he can attach zizin to the diota, and they're going to project out l'chutzer shalokech into the courtyard of the buyer. And the Gemara continues, Amar of Yosef bar Menyume, Amar of Nachman. Rav Yosef bar Menyume says that Rav Nachman says, Shchimera shakasav kol nechasav le'acherim. If a shchimera, someone on his deathbed, he writes over all of his property to others. And as we said in the Mishnah, when a shchimera is giving away all of his property, so then if he recovers, we say that the gifts are not considered valid. The shchimera retains those gifts because he in fact recovered. And so now Rav Nachman says, Rowan, we have to examine the situation. If from the beginning he meant to distribute all of his property, so then again we follow what we said in the Mishnah. Meis, if he dies, kanu kulan, they all acquire, all the recipients acquire the gift. But if he recovers, choser bekulan, he retracts on all of them. However, im benimlach, let's say it was a situation of nimlach, and the Rashbam here explains, im benimlach shelo haya bedaito lechalik kol nechasav. He originally did not want to give out all of his property. He was going to retain some of the property for himself, and in such a situation, he's not able to retract. Let's say he recovers. But ela achar shechilek shasak. In this case, after he distributed, he was quiet. V'lo ratza lechalikot. He didn't want to give anything further. But then chazer v'nimlach bi'atzma. But then he changed his mind lechalik kol hanosr, and he gave all of the rest. So the initial gifts that he gave, he meant to retain some for himself, but then he later changed his mind. And so we examine the situation and we say, im benimlach, if in fact it was a case of nimlach, so then Mesa, if he dies, kanukulan, so of course they all acquire, all the recipients acquire the gifts. But in this case, if he recovers, he's not able to retract because he didn't give everything away. At the beginning, his intention was to keep for himself. So eino choser ela biachron, so then he can only retract on that last gift, the last thing that he gave after he changed his mind and decided to give everything away. So those gifts he's able to retract on, but the earlier ones, where really he was giving them with the intention of keeping some for himself, those gifts are going to remain. But the Gemara asks on this, V'dilma iyune kama'ayin v'hadar yoev. But maybe what was happening was he was trying to examine exactly how to give everything out, and then he gave it. So maybe the delay was not that he wasn't intending on giving everything away. Maybe he was intending on giving everything away all along. He just didn't know who he was giving what to, and therefore we should treat it all as if he was going to give it all away. He should be able to retract on all of it if he recovers. The Gemara says that's not generally the case. Stame de shchimera meidak dayek v'hadar yoev. In general, when a shchimera gives away his property, he first examines, he determines what he's going to do specifically, and then he gives it away. So from the fact that he was nimlach, from the fact that in this case he stopped, he paused, that showed that that was not his original intention. He never wanted to give everything away in the beginning. It was only later that he decided to give everything away. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Achabar Menyume, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Achabar Menyume says that Rav Nachman says, shchimera shekasav kol nechasav la'acherim. If a shchimera, someone on his deathbed, he writes over all of his property to others, v'amar, and then he recovers, eino choser. He's actually not able to retract, even though the Mishnah seemed to say that he is able to retract. And why is that? Because chayshinon shemi yesh lo nechasim b'medina acheres, because we suspect maybe he does have property in another country, and therefore it's possible he really didn't give everything away, and that's why he's not able to retract. But the Gemara says, but according to that, our Mishnah, the Gatani, because it says in our Mishnah, lo shayir karka kolshu, if he didn't leave any land at all for himself, ein matanaso kayemes, so then it says that his matana is not effective, is not sustained if he recovers, and he's able to retract. But how could you ever have that case in the Mishnah? Aren't we always concerned that he might have some other property in some other country? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chama says, B'yomer, the case of the Mishnah is where he says specifically, Kol nechasa, he says all of my property. He makes it clear he's giving all the property away. There is no doubt. Mar Baravashi, Amar Mar Baravashi says, B'muchzaklon, it's a case where there's a presumption, there's a chazaka, the Leslie, that he doesn't have any other property. We can follow chazaka in that case in the Mishnah and assume there is no other property. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Chazara b'mixas, let's say he retracts in some of what he gave, have a chazara b'kula, is that considered a retraction in all of it? Lo or not, maybe that's not considered to be a retraction in all of it. And the Rashbam explains the question, they had the following question, Chazara b'mixas, if he retracts some of it, Shchimera shakasav kol nechasav liachad. The case is a shchimera, someone on his deathbed writes over all of his property to one person, so he's giving everything away to that one person. V'chazar bo b'mixas, but then he retracts on some of it, v'nasan shav la'achar, and instead gives some of it to a second person, to a different person. Sharei yochol lasos kan, and he is able to do that. K'damrinan daitiki mevatelas daitiki b'pirkan deleil. We said that one daitiki can nullify another one. We said that in the earlier parak, and that's what's happening over here. The question is as follows: do we actually say he's retracting completely from what he gave to the first person? He's showing that he regrets that he gave to the first person. And then we're going to say that what he gave to the second, which wasn't everything, is just a partial gift. The ikashir, he did leave something for himself. And so therefore it's going to be a gift. And let's say his heirs can come, and from the first person they can take away. He didn't mean to give to that first person. Maybe we're going to say it's not a chazara. What he gave to the second person gets. But whatever remained, the first person still does get said, it's still considered like he gave everything away. And if we're going to say that it's like he gave everything away, so then if he recovers mecholya from his illness, yachzer b'shnein, then we're going to follow the halacha that he can retract on both of them, sharei lo shayer liatzmo klum, because he didn't leave anything for himself. So that's essentially the question. When he gives part of it to that second person, is he saying that the first person still retains his gift, or no? He himself is going to retain that part that he gave to the first person. He's retracting on what he gave to the first person, and it's just a partial gift to the second person. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here a proof from the following. Brisa, Kulan Larishon, let's say initially he gives all of his property to the first recipient, Umiksasan Lasheni, and then he retracts part of that, and he gives part of it to a second individual. That's exactly our case. And the Brisa says, Sheni Kana, the second person does acquire, he receives his gift, but Rishon Lo Kana, but the first person does not acquire, he does not get his gift. And the Gemara says, My lav, is it not? Bishames, the case over here is that he did not recover, but he actually died. And what we're essentially saying is, Chazara b'miksas have chazara b'kula. We're saying that since he retracted part of the gift and gave part of it to that second individual, the first person gets nothing. That seems to be what the Brisa is saying. And the Gemara says, Lo no b'sha'amad. The case over here actually is he recovered. And since he recovered and he gave away all of his property, so again, the halach is somebody who gives away all of his property but then recovers, he can retract on the gift. And that's why the first person does not acquire his gift. Now the problem over here is, the Gemara is going to ask this later on, if that's true, the second person also should not acquire his gift, because since he gave away everything and he recovered, that also should be retracted. The Gemara will ask that. But right now, the Gemara is saying the reason why the first person does not get his gift is not because he retracted the gift from the first person, but rather it's because he recovered. And the Gemara continues, Hachinami Mistabra, makes sense to say like this, that the Brisa is talking about a situation of Bisha Amad when he recovered. Miniktani Seifa, from what we learned at the end of the Brisa. The end of this Brisa says, Miksasan Larishon, let's say he gives part of his property to the first recipient, V'kulan L'sheni, and then he goes ahead and he gives all of his property to a second recipient. So the Brisa says, Rishon Kana, the Brisa says the first person he does acquire, he receives his gift, but Sheni Lo Kana, but the second person, he does not acquire his gift. And so the Gemara says, Yamrid Bishlamana, if you're going to say correctly Bisha Amad, if you're going to say that this Brisa in general is talking about where the person recovers, then we can understand the end of this Brisa. Misham Hachi Sheni Lo Kana. Because of this, we can understand that the second person should not get his gift, because at the time he gives everything to the second person, he's giving everything away. So then, if he recovers, the halacha is that he's able to retract. But at the time he gave to the first recipient, what he gave to the first recipient was just a partial gift. And by a partial gift, even if he recovers, that gift is going to be effective, and the first person receives his gift. But if you're going to say that the situation in this Brisa in general is where he actually dies, so then tarvayu liknu, so then the halacha should be, if he gave part of his property to the first person, and then he gives all the remainder of the property to the second person, so then tarvayu liknu, then they should both acquire. But yet again, we're making this distinction at the end of the Brisa, and saying only the first person acquires, therefore it seems that we're talking Bisha Amad, we're talking about a situation where he recovered. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Yemar le Rav Ashi. Rav Yemar said to Rav Ashi, V'tihavi nami Bisha Amad, even if you're going to say that our Brisa, this Brisa over here is talking Bisha Amad where he recovers, but still, Iyamrit Bishlama, if you're going to say correctly that Chazara b'mixas have Chazara b'kula, if you're going to say that a partial retraction is considered to be a full retraction in terms of the first individual, so Hainu Desheni Mios Kana, so then you could understand at least why the second individual is able to acquire. Meaning in the first part of the Brisa was where he gives everything to the first individual, to the first recipient, but then he says he's going to give partial, he retracts partially, and he's going to give part of that gift to the second individual. And so therefore Rav Yemar is saying to Rav Ashi, if you're going to say that when he gave to the second individual, he fully retracted his gift to the first person, so then you could understand that in this particular case, he's giving part of it to the second person, and he's giving nothing anymore to the first, so now it's a partial gift, and by a partial gift, the halach is he's not able to retract, and so therefore we could understand why we would say that the second person is going to acquire, but the first person is not going to acquire, because the chazara b'mixas was a full chazara from the first person. That was a retraction while he was alive, and then when he recovered, he's not able to retract the gift to the second person. And so therefore Rav Yemar is arguing, even if you're going to say Bisha Amad, even if you're going to say that that the first part of the brisa is talking about a situation where he recovered, you still have to say that chazara b'mixas is chazara b'kula. You're still going to have to say that he completely retracted what he gave to the first person. That's the only way to make the brisa make sense. But if you're going to say that chazara b'mixas lo have chazara b'kula, that when he retracted partially, it's not a full retraction, in which case in the first part of the brisa he's giving a partial gift to the second, but what he gave to the first remains, and therefore he's giving everything away in that situation, and then if he recovers he can retract. So nahavik and mechalik, then it should be like a case of mechalik where he's distributing all his property to different individuals, and then it shouldn't be an acquisition at all to either of them. So what essentially Rav Yemar is arguing is, even if you're going to say that this brisa is talking b'sha'amad where he recovers, you still have to say that chazar b'mixas is considered a chazar b'kula. The brisa still doesn't make sense. And the Gemara continues and says, V'hilchasa, and the halacha actually is, chazara b'mixas have chazara b'kula, that a retraction partially is considered a full retraction, and therefore, the way we can understand the brisa is as follows. Reisha mashkach asla, the beginning of the brisa we can understand, bein shemes, bein shaman. It makes perfect sense whether the person died or whether the person recovered, because again, in the first part of the brisa, he gave everything to the first individual, then effectively he fully retracted that gift and gave a partial gift to the second individual. So the first person is not going to acquire anything. It doesn't matter whether the person dies or recovers. And the second person is going to acquire whether the person dies or recovers, because it was just a partial gift. And so there's no retraction even if he recovers. That's how we'll understand the Reisha. However, the Gemara continues Seifa when it comes to the end of the brisa. Again, in the end of the brisa, the cases where he gives a partial gift to the first person and then gives the full gift, everything else, to the second person. So lo mashkachas lo ela kashamat. So that you'll have to say is talking where he recovered. That's the only way to understand that part of the brisa. And so the idea is when he gave the gift to the first person, it was a partial gift. By a partial gift, you cannot retract when you recover, and that's why Rishon Kana, that's why the first person does acquire. But to the second person, where he gave everything to that second individual, meaning everything else he gave to the second individual, he gave away all of his property, so when he recovers, he is able to retract that gift, and that's why the brisa says the second person does not acquire. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Hikdish kol nechasav yamad. Let's say a person is makdish all of his property and then he recovers. Is he able to retract by a case of hekdish? What's the halacha? Mi amrinan kol agabe hekdish gamru makni. Do we say that when it comes to hekdish, he fully is giving it away, he's not going to retract even if he recovers? Odilma, or maybe kol agabe nafshe lo gamru makni, since it's relevant to himself, he's going to keep it for himself if he recovers. He's not fully giving it away. If he recovers, he is able to retract. And the Gemara continues, Hifker kol nechasav ma. What if he makes all of his property ownerless? Mi'amrinan, do we say, Kevan da'af la'aniyim kashirim gamro makni, since he's giving to both the poor and the wealthy, and there's also a mitzvah involved in this, so maybe he's just fully giving it away. Odilmar, maybe kol agabe nafshe lo gamro makni. Again, it's relevant to himself. He recovers, he wants to keep his property, he didn't give it away in that circumstance. And the Gemara continues with another question, Chilek kol nechasav la'aniyim. What if he distributes all of his property to the poor? What's the halacha there? Mi'amrinan tzedakah, do we say that there it's total tzedakah? He's not giving, it's not ownerless where it's going both to the poor and the wealthy, it's going all to the poor. So vaday migmar gamaro makni, he's certainly totally giving it away, it's unconditional. Odilmar, maybe kol agabe nafshe lo gamaro makni. Again, it's relevant to himself, he recovered, and therefore he doesn't give it away in that situation. And the Gemara says, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Lishna Achrin, another version of the above series of questions. Hikdish kol nechasav mao. Again, if the person is makdish all of his property, what's the halacha? Hifker kol nechasav mao. If he makes all of his property ownerless, what's the halacha? Chilek kol nechasav la'aniyim mao. If he distributes all of his property to the poor, again, what is the halacha? And again, the Gemara says in this version, the Gemara leaves this as a question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Yitol, v'yizke, v'yachzik, v'yikne. If a shchimera uses any of these types of languages, he says Yitol, the person should take, or the person should acquire. Any of those words, kulan lashon matana hein, that's all considered the equivalent of using the language of matana, of a gift. By a shchimera, he has to use the language of matana, and these terms as well, they count as a language of matana, and they are effective for a shchimera. And the Gemara continues, B'masnisatan, and the Brisa was taught, Af yachsin v'yiras b'roi l'yarsho. Also the word yachsin and yiras, which connote an idea of Yerusha, of inheritance, that works as long as it's being given to somebody who is able to inherit. The idea would be, as the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, this follows Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says that if a person person has a bunch of sons and he says, I want one of my sons to inherit everything. I don't want to distribute it to all of my sons. So that is effective. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says you can give all the property to a ben habonim, to one son among all of the sons. And so the Gemara is saying, if you use the language of Yachsin or Yiras in that situation, and this son, of course, is Roy Leyarsho, is able to inherit him, that is effective. Like Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, everything goes to that son. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Mem Tes Amud Aleph.